The receptionist nearly threw the application into the pile without raising her eyes. It was another Monday morning, another queue of individuals hoping for employment at one of the biggest real estate firms along the California shoreline. But when the paperwork reached the executive office an hour later, the billionaire CEO halted in the middle of signing contracts. She focused on one line for such a long time that her assistant quietly asked whether something was wrong. It wasn't the man's work background. It wasn't his home address. It was his given name. If you believe in compassion and fresh starts, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. The morning mist still blanketed most of Harbor Point when Rowan Hale parked his aged pickup beside a grocery store. The truck rattled every time he turned off the engine, but it had transported him through 12 years without a single issue. He reached into the back seat where his 8-year-old son, Bram, was finishing the final bites of a peanut butter sandwich while reading a library book about whales. "You'll miss the school bus," Rowan said softly. "I'm on the last page." "You've been on the last page for 5 minutes." Bram smiled, shut the book, and climbed out. His backpack appeared nearly as worn as the truck. Rowan had sewn one of the shoulder straps himself after it tore during the winter months. They walked together to the school entrance. "How's your cough?" Rowan asked. "Better." "Are you sure?" Bram nodded. Children poured through the gates while parents hurried toward their jobs. Rowan stayed until he watched his son disappear inside the building. Only then did he return to the truck. His own workday no longer existed. 3 weeks earlier, the maintenance company where he had spent nearly 15 years had lost its largest contract. Within days, half the crew was let go. Rowan had packed his tools into a cardboard box, shaken hands with men he'd worked beside for years, and driven home wondering how long his savings would last. The answer had come sooner than expected. Rent, car insurance, school supplies, his father's medical bills, everything seemed to arrive simultaneously. For the first week he convinced himself another maintenance position would appear quickly. It didn't. Every interview ended the same way: "We'll keep your resume on file." Nobody ever called back. That Monday morning he decided pride could wait until bills were paid. Any honest work was worthwhile. Which was why he found himself driving toward Argent Holdings, a luxury property company known for managing hotels, office towers, and private estates stretching along the coast. Their website listed an opening: janitorial services, full-time, health benefits after 90 days. He had repaired boilers, managed electrical systems, replaced plumbing, supervised crews, and maintained commercial buildings larger than most shopping centers. Now he was applying to clean hallways. The security guard directed applicants toward a modern glass building overlooking the marina. Everything about the place felt refined. Employees crossed the marble lobby carrying coffee in reusable cups while conversations drifted between meetings. Rowan suddenly became aware of the faded elbows on his brown work jacket. He almost turned around. Instead, he took a quiet breath and stepped inside. The receptionist slid a clipboard across the counter without much interest. "Application." "Yes, ma'am." "Fill this out." He sat beside 3 other applicants. One was barely out of high school. Another wore expensive work boots that looked almost new. Rowan smiled politely but kept to himself. Questions covered the usual information: previous employers, emergency contacts, education, references. Then came the line asking for his full legal name. He wrote carefully, Rowan Elias Hale. The handwriting remained steady despite everything. After finishing, he returned the clipboard. "It may take a few days," the receptionist said. "I understand." As he reached the exit, another employee hurried over. "Sir." Rowan stopped. "The facilities manager wants to meet applicants briefly today, if you have time." "I have plenty of time." He almost laughed at how true that was. The waiting room outside the facility's office overlooked the harbor. Sailboats drifted slowly across calm water while gulls circled overhead. Rowan watched them for nearly 20 minutes. The manager finally emerged, a stocky man named Victor Keene with reading glasses balanced halfway down his nose. They shook hands. Victor studied Rowan's application. "You've done far more than janitorial work." "I have." "Then why apply here?" Rowan answered honestly, "I need steady work." Victor nodded as though he'd heard similar answers before. "We appreciate honesty here." The interview lasted less than 15 minutes, questions about schedules, equipment, safety procedures, working nights. Nothing unusual. As Rowan stood to leave, Victor smiled. "You seem overqualified." "I've heard that." "You understand this isn't maintenance management." "I understand." Victor extended his hand again. "We'll be making decisions soon." Rowan thanked him and headed for the parking lot. By lunchtime, he had already moved on to another application across town. Life didn't pause because hope felt uncertain. On the top floor of Argent Holdings, CEO Heiress was trying to finish reviewing a merger proposal before her afternoon board meeting. Her office overlooked the ocean. Visitors often admired the expensive artwork or floor-to-ceiling windows. Heiress barely noticed either anymore. She noticed spreadsheets, deadlines, emails, construction delays, insurance disputes. The company employed nearly 12,000 people across 4 states. Every decision carried weight. Her executive assistant entered carrying several folders. Human resources need signatures. Heiress reached automatically for her pen. One folder contained recommendations for new executive hires. Another covered internship approvals. Then came routine hiring paperwork requiring executive authorization because the company had recently launched a veteran employment initiative. Most applications passed beneath her eyes in seconds. Until one didn't. Her pen stopped. She read the name again, Rowan Elias Hale. The room became strangely quiet. Her assistant frowned. "Everything all right?" Heiress didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared through the office window toward the harbor where sunlight finally began breaking through the morning fog. That name had not crossed her desk in nearly 18 years. She whispered almost to herself, "It can't be." The assistant looked confused. "Do you know him?" "I knew someone with that name." "Not just someone, a family." A rainy afternoon. A small roadside repair shop. A promise she had never managed to repay. Memories she'd carefully buried beneath decades of business meetings suddenly returned with uncomfortable clarity. She closed the folder. "Can you ask Human Resources not to process this application yet? Is there a problem?" "No." Heiress looked down at the application one more time. "I just want to meet the applicant myself." The assistant blinked. "For a janitor position?" Heiress gave the smallest nod. "Personally." Far below, Rowan drove home with no idea that a single line written in careful handwriting had interrupted the busiest day of one of the wealthiest women on the West Coast. He assumed his application would disappear into another stack of paperwork, just like all the others. He had no reason to think otherwise. At home, he found Bram sitting on the apartment steps with an elderly neighbor, helping her untangle a bag of knitting yarn that had spilled across the sidewalk. Rowan smiled quietly before carrying the groceries inside. The red reminder was still pinned to the refrigerator with a faded magnet shaped like a lighthouse. He looked at it for a long moment, then opened the cupboard and began making dinner. Outside, the evening breeze carried the distant sound of boats returning to the marina. Somewhere across town, Heiress was opening an old wooden box she hadn't touched in years, searching for something connected to a name she thought she would never see again. Heiress found the old cedar box on the highest shelf of a cabinet in the corner of her office. It had moved with her through 3 headquarters, 2 homes, and more years than she cared to count. She brushed away a thin layer of dust before opening it. Inside were ordinary things that would have meant nothing to anyone else. A faded motel key card, a folded highway map with coffee stains, a small silver compass that no longer pointed north as reliably as it once had. And beneath those, tucked inside an envelope, was a receipt from a roadside repair shop, Hale Family Auto Service. The ink had faded, but the name was still there. She leaned back in her chair. 18 years earlier, she hadn't been a billionaire. She had been 26 years old, trying to keep a struggling construction startup alive after investors backed out. Her old sedan had broken down during a storm while she was driving to meet the only client who could have saved her company. The repair shop had been closing. A man named Elias Hale had reopened the garage after seeing her stranded. She remembered apologizing because she couldn't pay the full repair bill until the following week. Elias had simply smiled. "Get to your meeting," he had said. "Pay me when life settles down." Life never settled down. Within months, her business unexpectedly took off after landing several commercial contracts. She intended to return, but by the time she drove back, the repair shop had already closed. Someone nearby told her the owner had become ill and the family had moved away. She mailed a check to the old address. It came back unopened. Eventually, work swallowed the memory. Now, staring at the application on her desk, she noticed the emergency contact listed beneath Rowan's name, Elias Hale. The same name. She pressed the intercom. "Could you schedule Mr. Hale for tomorrow morning? For another interview?" "No." She paused. "I'd just like to speak with him." Rowan almost ignored the phone call the next morning because the number was unfamiliar. "This is Rowan." "Good morning, Mr. Hale. This is Human Resources at Argent Holdings. The CEO would like to meet you today if you're available." He frowned. "I'm sorry, the CEO?" "Yes. There must be some mistake." "There isn't." He looked around his apartment as though someone else might explain what was happening. "What time?" 10 o'clock. "I'll be there." After hanging up, he stood quietly in the kitchen. Bram looked up from pouring cereal. "Good news?" "I honestly don't know." The executive floor felt even quieter than Rowan remembered. Thick carpet softened every footstep. Glass walls reflected the bright morning sun pouring in from the ocean. An assistant greeted him warmly. "Ms. Eloin will see you now." Rowan stepped inside. The office was larger than his apartment, but the woman behind the desk didn't immediately seem intimidating. She stood instead of remaining seated and studied him with an expression that wasn't easy to read. "You must be Rowan Hale." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for coming." She motioned toward a chair. Neither of them spoke for a few moments. Finally, she asked, "Your father, is his name Elias?" Rowan nodded slowly. "It is." Heiress looked down for a second before smiling, though there was sadness behind it. "I hoped I wasn't mistaken." Rowan searched his memory. "I'm sorry. Have we met before?" "No." She folded her hands together. "But your father helped me once. Long before either of us imagined we'd end up here." She told him the story, not dramatically, not quickly, just as she remembered it. When she finished, Rowan smiled faintly. "That sounds like him. Is he well?" "He has heart problems now. Good days and bad days." "I'm sorry to hear that." "He still tries fixing lawn mowers for neighbors even though I keep telling him to slow down." For the first time, both of them laughed. It eased the room. Heiress reached into a drawer and placed the faded repair receipt on the desk. "I've carried this for years." Rowan stared at it. "I haven't seen our old shop logo since I was a teenager. I owed your father far more than this receipt." "You don't owe us anything." "I think I do." He shook his head gently. My dad never helped people expecting something back. Those words lingered in the room longer than either of them expected. Heiress understood something in that moment. If she offered Rowan a job because of an old debt, she would be turning his father's kindness into a transaction. That wasn't what Elias Hale had believed in. She slid the receipt back into the envelope. I won't insult either of you by pretending sentiment should replace qualifications. Rowan appreciated the honesty. She continued, I reviewed your work history myself. He looked surprised. You've supervised maintenance teams, trained apprentices, and managed commercial systems. Why apply for janitorial work? Because that's where the opening was. And because I needed work. Yes. She nodded. I respect that answer. Instead of ending the meeting there, Heiress asked the facilities director and the operations manager to join them. The next hour became something Rowan hadn't expected. They talked about building systems, preventive maintenance, energy costs, training younger workers, safety inspections. Rowan answered naturally because it was work he had spent most of his adult life doing. At one point, the operations manager leaned back and smiled. We've been trying to solve the ventilation issue for months. Rowan shrugged. It probably needs a different maintenance schedule, not new equipment. The manager scribbled notes. Heiress watched quietly. She was no longer seeing a janitor applicant, she was seeing someone who had nearly stopped believing in his own experience because unemployment had pushed him toward whatever job might keep food on the table. When the meeting ended, she stood. I don't think the janitor position is the right fit. Rowan forced a polite smile. I understand. I wasn't finished. She handed him another folder. We have an opening for assistant regional maintenance supervisor. It pays considerably more, includes health insurance immediately, and requires exactly the experience you've spent years building. He looked at the folder without opening it. I didn't apply for this. No. You don't even know if I'd be good at it. I know enough to offer you an interview for the position. She smiled. The interview happened during the last hour. For several seconds, Rowan simply sat there, not because he was overwhelmed, but because after weeks of rejection, it felt unfamiliar to have someone actually notice what he could do instead of what job title he had applied for. He finally asked, Are you offering this because of my father? Heiress answered carefully. I'm offering it because you're qualified. She paused. And because your father reminded me many years ago to see the person in front of me before judging the situation they're in. That answer mattered. It allowed Rowan to accept without feeling that charity had replaced dignity. Several weeks later, Bram visited the headquarters during an employee family day. He wandered through the maintenance workshop wearing oversized safety glasses while Rowan introduced him to technicians across the building. Near the end of the afternoon, Heiress happened to pass by. Bram thanked her politely for hiring his dad. She smiled. I think your dad earned that himself. Then the boy reached into his backpack. I made something. It was a simple drawing, a little repair shop, a tall office building, two people shaking hands between them. Above the picture he had written in uneven handwriting, Kindness travels farther than we think. Heiress asked if she could keep it. It's yours. She framed it a week later and placed it on a bookshelf instead of behind her desk. Visitors occasionally asked about the child's drawing. She always answered the same way, it reminds me not to overlook ordinary people. Months passed. Rowan settled naturally into his new position. He wasn't perfect, he occasionally misjudged schedules, forgot small details, and once accidentally ordered the wrong replacement filters for 3 buildings. Instead of hiding the mistake, he admitted it immediately and fixed it with his team. The people working under him respected that. His father gradually recovered enough strength to visit one of the company's buildings. He insisted on bringing homemade oatmeal cookies for the maintenance crew because, as he liked to say, people work better after a decent cookie. Nobody argued with him. One quiet afternoon, Heiress met Elias in person. He had no idea who she was until she mentioned the rainy night years before. He smiled with the same calm kindness she remembered. "I figured things worked out for you." "They did. I'm glad." There was no speech, no grand reunion, just two people sharing coffee while watching workers replace flower beds outside the building. It felt complete. Before leaving, Elias looked toward Rowan talking with his crew. "You know," he said softly, "he almost didn't apply here." "I'm glad he did." "So am I. Sometimes life doesn't reward kindness immediately. Sometimes it circles back years later in a form no one expects, not as repayment, but as an opportunity to notice someone who might otherwise be overlooked." Comment below, kindness still exists if you believe even one good act can change someone's life. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. The best opportunities often begin when someone chooses to look beyond a job title, a worn jacket, or a difficult season. Kindness doesn't erase hardship, but it can remind people of their worth, and sometimes that's exactly where a better future begins.